Stephen was educated in England at Caterham School and Cambridge University. He has a degree in mechanical sciences, general engineering, and has become expert in many technologies during his career in high tech. He founded his own consulting company and worked with Fidelity Investments, Verizon, Unisys, many others. Outside of the work arena, he has had an abiding interest in the areas of the mind, mind-body interaction, space travel, cosmology, philosophy, and comparative religion since the late 70s. Since the mid-80s, he's done intensive reading and study in the areas of UFO and ET contact and the implications. These studies led him to publish 2 books, Who the Bleep Designed Us, that's right in the other room, and Extraterrestrials, They Are Here Now. Well, I think Stephen will be able to give you his thoughts on what he wants to discuss, which his title today is How UFOs and ETs Are Relevant and Important Today. Or actually, how are UFOs and ETs relevant and important today? So let's welcome Stephen Matherlees.
Well, good morning. Hope everybody's more awake than I am. I'll do the best I can. So let me give you just a wee bit more background. I have had some experiences. I did a couple of trainings in Florida with Dr. Stephen Greer, who basically teaches how to make contact and among a lot of other things. He's been working on trying to get the government to disclose what it knows for at least 25 years. And it was amazing how the news media have successfully shut him down on many occasions. I attended the X conference in Washington 2008, I think it was. And it was at the National Press Club. So you would think that would get some coverage. Not so. It didn't. There were no Congress people present, no senators, barely any journalists. So that was just eye-opening and discouraging. But that still goes on today. So we need to talk about, or refresh ourselves maybe, on why this is relevant and important. So let's move on. Okay, recapping our own little galaxy here. 100,000 or so light years. LY is the short for light years, and MW is the Milky Way. So 100,000 light years in diameter, between 1 and 400 billion stars. And according to NASA, our taxes at work, at least 100 billion planets. That's a big number. And NASA has also established that of that 100 billion, probably as many as 10 million or more, 10 billion or more have planets that could be habitable. In other words, they're in the so-called Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold. So that's a very different picture from what we had, well, when I first wrote my first book about evolution, Who the Bleep Designed Us, which is out there. At that time, all we had was the so-called Drake equation, which was a way of calculating the likelihood of there being an intelligent race in the galaxy. And he came up with a very low number. It was in the 10 to 100 region, based on what we knew at that time, which was that there were very few planets around, if any, and the likelihood of them being habitable was really low. Well, now we know a lot different from that. Let's see. So we're not in a particularly conspicuous position in this galaxy, 27,000 light years from the center, and we go around the loop 240 million years. In other words, 4 times per billion, which means we haven't done very many rotations around since the Earth was formed. That makes me think that seems intuitively wrong. It seems it would have taken much longer for things to settle down and mature in the way that made it possible for us to be here. But the implication is that there are, well, I wouldn't say, I was going to say your guess is as good as mine. I don't know whether your guess is as good as mine. But it does imply that hundreds of millions of intelligent races almost certainly do exist in our galaxy. And that means the evidence that ETs are visiting, have been visiting for incredibly long time, for a very long time. Some of the first accounts appear in the Sumerian records of maybe 10,000 years ago, very well described by Zecharia Sitchin, who wrote a number of books. And the evidence shows that there are not one but many races visiting at the present time. So now we have to ask ourselves, well, why are they here? And what I'd like us to do is put ourselves in the position of being an ET visiting Earth at this present time and looking around and saying, wow, what a bunch of boneheads. Are these people ready to join us in the galactic community? And I think the answer has to be no. I mean, we're not ready. Next question. Well, if you were looking around here again as an ET, what would you feel that we as Earth beings have to do to make ourselves acceptable to the rest of the galaxy? And here are some possibilities. Well, nuclear weapons have to go. Space-based weapons, absolutely not. Clean up our environment, yeah. Get rid of some of our forms of intolerance and bigotry. And what I want to talk about is, firstly, what's happening today, and secondly, what should we be doing that we're not already doing? And I'm going to want to solicit your opinions on that in a few minutes. So here are some suggestions. Stay aware, watch the sky, look for anomalies. And one of the interesting anomalies, or sort of anomalies, we might be subjected to today is one wonders who is in the audience that is observing, maybe from a very long distance perspective, or some of our taxes at work, the NSA may be keeping track of us. So just, I think putting out our awareness is a big one. Looking for ways to improve the planet. Well, hopefully we're all doing that as far as we can with the environment and what we eat and what we do with our yards in terms of pesticides. Hopefully not. And speaking out is really important. Not being afraid to bring this subject up in conversation. spreading the word by email, by YouTube, by Facebook, whatever, that has to make a difference. And I think we could probably all do more of that. So yeah, and when we come across negative behavior, which is happening all the time, you just have to read the papers. Some of it even emanates from the White House. Did you say liberal nonsense? It may be nonsense to you, sir, but it's not nonsense to all of us. I don't regard this. But guys, could we? Can we save this conversation for the question time, sir? Thank you for your input. Could we please save our comments for? I'll leave plenty of time for questions at the end. And we all have our opinions. So I think the topic of what we need to do to make ourselves worthy to our friends and cousins and relatives in the galaxy is, in fact, to look after our planet better. And there are lots of opinions on how to do that, and I think I'll be soliciting some opinions later. I think these possibilities speak for themselves. I don't want to go through them all, but I just wanted to mention that I am, to some extent, walking the walk here. This is my home with some solar panels, and my electric bills are really low, which I'm glad about. Now on to what may or may not be encouraging our ET friends about our attitudes and intentions. The secret space program has arguably been going on since the 1920s, when it seems that a race of ETs approached a secret society in Germany called the VRIL, V-R-I-L, and gave them enough technology to start working on anti-gravity and space travel. And the Germans picked up on this. Fortunately, it seems they didn't really share it with Hitler. Otherwise, World War II might have gone very differently. But since I've always had an interest in aerospace, and witnessing what happened when our space program was virtually shut down in the 1970s. It was restricted to the space shuttle, which is strictly local in our environment here, and the International Space Station, which is still very local, and the Hubble telescope doing wonderful work, but it's still very close in to us. We're not really out there, or are we? So if I had seen the space program come to a virtual standstill around 1970, I would have been really pissed off. And I would have done, if I was in some position of power, I would have made damn sure that it continued. And for that reason, I'm kind of sure that that is in fact what happened, because I wasn't the only one who thought that way for sure. If you listen to Gaia.com, and if you don't, I would highly recommend it. You can listen to a guy called Corey Goode, who has apparently been involved with the secret space program for a couple of decades now, and probably more. And he asserts that we have bases, as have the ETs, also on the moon, on Mars, and on other planets and moons within the solar system. So there's apparently a lot going on, and again, we have to wonder how the ETs are feeling about this. Because we're working not only on traveling in space, but on weaponizing space, and that must be really unpopular with the galactic community. It seems, again, according to Corey Goode, who I find very persuasive, he has no ego. He's very matter of fact, and if he doesn't know the answer to something, he just says, well, I don't know. He's not pushing himself. He's certainly not making money. And for those reasons, I find him very credible. So it seems that there are more than one agency group involved in working on space. I think he identified 3 or 4. Well, we don't need to go into detail. I would suggest you listen to him on Gaia.com if you want more information on that. But different agendas, occupying different places. Some of them have been apparently outside the solar system. Some are kind of localized to Mars. It varies. And it really does seem as if there are many more than one ET race involved. And it's, again, a good question as well. Presumably they have differing agendas. They're not all here for the same reason. So, yeah, I just talked about Corey Goode. So one thing he really is big on is that we should use our own judgment in looking at stuff and evaluating what's going on. That, again, in my mind, adds to his credibility. And that we're going to be responsible for saving ourselves. I have a feeling I skipped a slide. Yes. Okay. Somehow I skipped about 3 slides. Excuse me. All right. So these are questions that I'd like to put to the audience. We accept that we're being visited. How does everybody feel about that? Probably we wouldn't be in this room otherwise. So how many races do we think are visiting us? Do we think it's one, more than one? One? I think it's more than one. More than 10? Okay. All right. So then why do we think they're here? There's lots of possibilities, I think. Do we think they're academics? Probably. Tourists? I mean, just think what a great PhD thesis this planet would make for a visiting graduate student. There's doctorates being awarded all over the galaxy about us. Conquerors? Anybody think they're here as conquerors? Yeah, I don't think so either. The most obvious argument about that is if they wanted to conquer us, they could have done it a long, long time ago. Certainly, if they have the technology to get here, they have the technology to beat us up if they want to. Friends concerned about us. In other words, very benign. How many people think that? Friends? I think some of them are. Genetic engineers? I think so. That's what my first book is all about. So I already committed myself on that one. Miners? Do they want our natural resources? Anybody think? I have a hard time with that one because I can't believe they wouldn't have plenty of that stuff on their home solar system. So why bother coming here to mine the asteroids? There's so much stuff in our own asteroid belt that it can't be unique. There must be many, many places in the galaxy where you can find every mineral, metal, whatever you want. All of the above? Well, yeah, probably. I think all of the above. So, but here's the one that gets me going is here we are amongst maybe 100 billion planets and intelligent races. So you have to ask yourself, well, isn't it probable that every race in the galaxy goes through crisis at some point in their development, similar to ours at this present time? And, the likelihood that there are very many at any one moment in the galaxy is not large. We may be the only one, and that makes us interesting, not just to academics, but to anybody who's out there in the galaxy wandering around looking and seeing what's going on. We may be the only place that's in crisis at the present time. And that needs to make a difference to how we behave and how we try to interact with these visitors. Next good question is just how much trouble is our planet in? Are we in as much trouble as some of us think we are, or we just need to wait for things to settle down? Okay, how many people think we're in a lot of trouble? Okay. And how many? It doesn't seem as if there's any guarantee that we'll come out of it. Some of the ETs that are visiting us may be here to help, but very good, and for that matter myself, think that it's really up to us. And that's why these chats about what we should or should not do are important, I think. We need to talk about it, because there's no guarantee that we'll come through this. Out of 100 billion races, we have to imagine that some of them didn't make it. I mean, just statistically, it's not going to happen. Some of them will fail and wipe themselves out. And we could make that list if we're not careful. And a related question as well, maybe there is a prime directive in the galaxy that you're not allowed to interfere with other people's development. That's a thought. There's no way of knowing that for sure. And as we just talked about on the secret space program, are we already out there? I think we all. Well, are we already out there? Why is it being kept secret? Well, I think a number of reasons. That's come up several times at this conference. The secrecy and the cover-ups, and why and how does it help anyone? My suspicion is that it comes down to money, as so many things do. There's money to be made out there. And if you believe Corey Good, we have manufacturing plants on Mars that are supplying spare parts and maintenance and craft and stuff to, he thinks, as many as 200 different races of ETs. Again, hard to verify, but certainly food for thought. That we're providing hardware to certainly our local section of the galaxy and maybe more. Okay, I brought this up earlier, so if you were visiting, would you feel like welcoming us in? Yeah, we looked at this slide already, didn't we? We looked at that already. So another person I'd bring to your attention, if you're not already aware of, how many people are aware of David Wilcock? Okay, I would recommend him to you. He has a website called divinecosmos.com. He gives 2 talks on somewhat different subjects every week on Gaia.com. He has a number of interviews with Corey Good, which make very interesting listening and viewing. I've met David on a few occasions. He put on a seminar in Boston a few years ago, which I went to. He's a relatively young guy, but very sincere and not perfect by any means. I happen to disagree with him on a couple of points, but he's always worth listening to, and his books, he has several books, are just loaded with references. You can bury yourself up to the ears in reading material for a long time if you follow that stuff up. He has excellent ongoing contacts with many people, including so-called whistleblowers who will talk about cover-ups and what's going on. The Ascension Mysteries, his latest book, is well worth a read, as are his others. William Tompkins has also been on Gaia.com, interviewed by David Wilcock. And this is, I think he recently passed on. But he was involved in the 1940s, right after World War II, with looking at designs for spacecraft and space infrastructure, like space stations and habitats and factories and whatnot. And he was very, even though he was in his 90s when he was most recently on, very articulate and, again, very credible. And it seems as if at least some of his designs actually became put into practice in the 1970s. And he asserted that he had help from a race of ETs in his work. So that again raises the questions, well, what exactly is the role of the ETs here? Are they here to help? Apparently this race was. So again, his interview with David Wilcock, worth a watch on Gaia.com. Edgar Mitchell is someone I was also privileged to meet a number of times. He was on Apollo 14 and confirmed that he had had some sightings of UFOs and ETs. And this bottom sentence is worth spending a moment or two on. He conducted an ESP experiment from Apollo 14 while he was on the moon. And he was doing that routine where there are, I think, 5 cards with different symbols on, square, circle, diamond, star, kind of thing. And a colleague in Houston was selecting cards at random, and he was picking up on them and transmitting back the one he picked. And of course, he's extremely accurate. And the interesting part is that his replies were coming in much too quickly. It only takes about a second and a half for a radio or light signal to reach the moon. And if you bounce it off and you respond immediately, that means it should be 3 seconds since you turn over the card and he comes back with a response. Well, the response was coming back in about 1.8 seconds, which means he was getting the information virtually instantaneously. I mean, his response was coming back at the speed of light. But so what we deduce from that experiment is a fascinating one, which is that information is not limited by the speed of light. It's virtually instantaneous. And that means that everything we're doing is instantly knowable everywhere in the universe, which is a little scary, but the evidence says that the information is immediate. Not the picture, but the information. Stephen Greer is someone I've also spent some time with. He gave these trainings in Florida that I attended. A very impressive guy, except for having a rather expanded ego. And I had some actual ET contact of my own at his training it was at Marco Island in Florida. And he has a new movie coming out right now called Unacknowledged, which I certainly plan to watch. It should be released very soon now. So that's as far as I go with the formal stuff. Now I'd like to take some questions. Would you like to come up to the microphone, sir? Or loudly then, if you're not going to come to the microphone. There's one problem we occasionally have here is that people talk quietly and not everybody can hear. And I think it's really important that everybody hear.
So talking about qualifications to join the Galactic Federation, right?
Yeah.
I took some early childhood education classes, and to be able to go to daycare, do people remember what the qualifications for your kid to get into daycare was? Go ahead. What? Oh, well, that's true, yeah. So maybe we have to, but I'm talking about you can't push each other, you can't bite, or else you don't get into childcare. Yeah. So we're like those children compared to the extraterrestrials. They're not going to let us in if there's no race. What's the race? It's a dance of life. There's no race to go anywhere. It's a dance of life. So they're beyond races, in my opinion. The idea of race and bigotry, they're about oneness. They see the spirit in all of us.
We would like to think so.
There's no differentiation. They see that great spirit in all of us. The ego is gone. If you can manifest at will anything you want, right? Scarcity's gone. This whole idea. And it's like when I was a kid, I wanted hot fudge sundaes, but my parents couldn't afford every day to give us. Now I can. So there's a consequence to me doing that. But when you can have a hot fudge sundae every day, you don't do it. So they can have anything they want. They don't need anything from us. So it's about love. It's really about love and us getting to that point of seeing each other as one.
Yeah, I agree. But it does raise another question, again, on statistical grounds. Out of 100 billion intelligent races, do we seriously believe that none of them are bad guys?
Well, I agree. They're
Do we have bad guys?
Do you agree that we have a protective group around us in a way? Do we agree there's a
I've heard that said. I haven't seen any good evidence.
But we're still here. They haven't conquered us.
No.
The bad ones.
Maybe there's nothing in it for them. It's hard to see why, if they have all this wonderful technology of their own, what they would gain by conquering us.
I think they've gotten
unless bringing people down to a level of, if you like, evil gets them brownie points of some kind.
Well, there's a soul evolution, is my opinion. There's a soul evolution. We're evolving spiritually, like we talked about going from fourth to third, third to fourth density and fifth and on. So it's about evolution of the spirit. And others have helped them, so they're passing it on. They're paying it forward.
True. Again, going back to David Wilcock, he is a proponent of the so-called law of one, otherwise known as the Ra material. Yeah. And that clearly describes, the left-hand path and the right-hand path. And although the majority, maybe the big majority of us, are trying to grow and be better, other people are trying to grow in a different way, and they can, at least according to the raw material, can go to at least to the fifth density. But for reasons of how the universe works, I guess they cannot make it to the sixth density and stay negative. But we're in third, and trying to get into fourth.
Until you get to that higher realm, I'm just imagining that you need a yin and yang, or else you don't know the yin if you don't have the yang.
That's right.
So, and there is a thing about codependency too that can happen, where you can be codependent on someone and think you're actually enabling them to stay stuck instead of self-fulfilled. So there is a self-ish, self-is thing playing out, and I guess it's in moderation and levels. And we can't afford to be so nice to help everybody. We have to first. Like when you're in an airplane and they tell you that if the oxygen thing comes down, I used to always think, oh, put it on the kid first. But no, they tell you, put it on you. Because if you're not capable, how are you going to help the other? So, but I don't know if anybody else used to think that. Oh, I'm going to give it to the kid. No, you take care. You do have to have a point of taking care of yourself too. So there is some of that, the raw material, the yin and yang, service to self, service to others. So thank you very much. Love you, and thanks for your talk.
Thanks. Okay, anybody else have any thoughts?
Thank you for your presentation. I wasn't able to hear the entire presentation. I had to leave momentarily, so I'm not sure if you covered the subject of UFOs and nuclear missiles. Not everybody's aware of the subject. Many people are aware of the ongoing threat of nuclear armament in the world, including from nation states like North Korea. But not a whole lot of people know about the history of UFOs hovering over nuclear missile sites in this country. And I consider that to be very relevant because according to UFO researcher Robert Hastings, for example, he says that there have been incidents as recently as 2 years ago that have been documented about this, and some of these incidents involve UFOs tampering with the nuclear readiness, the launch readiness of these weapons, sometimes shutting them down, sometimes starting them. Nothing has been fired as a result, no missiles have been fired as a result, but this seems to be, we're already on a very delicate balancing beam, and with this kind of issue going on, it's also been referenced by the author Timothy Good in his book Above Top Secret. He has a section where he talks about NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense, picking up on UFOs hovering over nuclear missile sites. It's also been, according to Robert Hastings, who has interviewed over 160 U.S. veterans who've gone on the record, that it's happening in other countries too. So I was hoping you could comment on this and how this might play into modern political
Yeah.
geopolitics.
Yeah, thanks. That's an interesting part of the equation, is to what extent ETs feel that they're A, allowed to, and B, really should interfere in what's going on. And as the gentleman said, there are signs that they draw the line at space-based nuclear weapons, and they won't allow that to happen. And as he said, there are some of those incidents where they went to missile sites and shut them down, disabled the weapons for a period of time, can be taken as a warning. Just stop doing this stuff. There was another occasion when NASA was planning to let off a nuclear bomb on the moon to see what happened. And lovely. Again, our taxes at work, you got to love it. That failed to work. And you have to ask yourself, well, did the good guys among the ETs shut that down? I think there's good reason to believe that. And I feel it's a damn good thing they did. So thanks for that question. That sheds some light on the topic. Anybody else have anything? Okay.
You mentioned that there's like 100 billion, planets, therefore a lot of possible ET races. And I'm just wondering, do you feel there's like a primary one that's here, or do you feel like it's more spread out amongst, like that there's a variety that are here? Do you feel there's one primary race that's here visiting, and why?
Well, with those kinds of numbers, I think we have to accept that some of them have been sentient for not millions, but maybe even billions of years, and it's impossible to conceive what that looks like. I mean, it's hard to imagine what we will look like even 100 years from now. Think about 1 million or even 1,000. So some of these races are so far advanced from us that they may have completely taken themselves off into some other realm, and we don't even know what that might look like. Some of them may feel a responsibility to keep the galaxy in some kind of order. In the raw material, which I was talking about, it comes across that there's probably that if there is a God, or some original creator that's still taking an interest, he, she, it may delegate and put a being in charge of a galaxy, another being in charge of a solar system, and a being in charge of our planet, for instance, that some of us like to call Gaia. Many people believe that the planet is sort of alive on a personal level, and it's a nice thought. I don't know. Obviously, there's no perfect evidence for it. So,
time. I don't even understand Einstein's relativity theory, about time and distance, and like the satellites have to adjust the clock just because they're moving around the planet. I don't even understand all the physics, but I read these things and they say time is an illusion. It's not at all what we think it is. We're in some kind of hypnotic state here with the sun and the moon and going around that keeps us locked into time. There really isn't time. And if these beings understand more than we do about that, the whole relativity thing of like how much time it takes to evolve or grow, it isn't even concerned with them. There's some sense that there isn't really time, which I can't get there.
Well, what I like to think of is that there really is time as far as we're concerned, and therefore it exists
For us.
because we experience it.
Yeah.
Because some other being in some other density or reality does not experience it in the same way as we do, doesn't make it any less real for us.
Right, but just to understand where they're coming from, they might be a lot more patient with us than we are with ourselves in a way.
Well, yes, and they can study our history and maybe extrapolate and feel better about the outcome.
And if I could add,
Meanwhile, we're here and now, and we have
yeah,
to deal with it.
We're here now. I look both ways before I cross the street, even though I know I'm mostly space and fluid.
Mostly is right, yeah.
But I went to a channeling friend who was like a philosopher for many years, and one thing he said that happens in this evolution of souls is that we are like children, and guns won't be handed to children, powerful weapons or devices. But as we evolve, we actually, if we get to that higher level you were mentioning, we actually create universes and inhabit them, have the loving energy to inhabit them. And I mean, that's just way out there, but that's what we might be. We are children of some being that reached that elevation, and it's overseeing this. That's very philosophical and out there, and I have no proof, but that's the idea.
Well, many of the people who talk about time and for that matter space as an illusion are basing it on mathematics. And I like to remind those people that mathematics is a tool. It is not a version of reality just because your equations balance.
But you like that idea that you could one time, as you elevate your consciousness and soul, that you will create a solar system. How would you like that?
Eventually, if you get really, really, really advanced, possibly, yeah.
Thank
why
you
not?
for being open to that.
Okay, anybody else got any thoughts? Okay, well, I don't have anything more to add, so we can finish early if you like.